10-year-old Caleb Turner stepped between 3 older boys and an 8-year-old girl at a cracked bus stop on Maple and 3rd. By the end of that week, 350 motorcycles would circle his school, and the people of Riverton would argue on talk radio about whether a skinny kid's broken ribs were worth all that leather and chrome. Caleb didn't know any of that when he moved his feet. He didn't know about the man on the edge of town who shared the girl's last name, or the leather vests hanging on hooks in a grease-stained garage, or the quiet phone calls that would cross 3 states before Saturday sunrise. He only knew a simpler thing. A girl was in trouble, and nobody else was doing anything about it. The rest, the engines, the school board meeting, the way grown men with gray in their beards lined the walls of a high school auditorium, came later. Before all of that, there was just the town, the boy, and the corner where their paths crossed. Riverton sat along a tired stretch of river in southern Indiana, the kind of place that still had more smokestacks than jobs. Old brick factories leaned over the water like they were listening for something that wasn't coming back. Main Street's best days lived in black and white photographs on cafe walls. A handful of stores hung on: the hardware shop, the diner, the grocery where Caleb's mom worked the early shift. People got by. Some with union pensions, some with double shifts, some with nothing but stubbornness. Caleb, his mother, and his little sister rented half of a narrow house a few blocks from the river. The porch steps sloped a little. The front yard was more dirt than grass. Inside, it smelled like coffee in the mornings and laundry soap at night. His mom called it our place, in a voice that dared anyone to say it wasn't good enough. Most mornings started the same: the alarm at 4:30, the kettle whistle, his mother's soft footsteps passing his door. "Breakfast money's on the counter, Caleb," she'd say. "You get yourself to that bus, you hear me? Lock the door behind you." He always did. He poured cereal for his sister, packed his own backpack, zipper slow so it wouldn't catch where the teeth were bent, and stepped out into the chill of early autumn. The sky over the river was the color of old steel. His breath showed in little puffs as he walked. Caleb was not the kind of boy most people noticed. Thin, quiet, with a cowlick that never lay flat, and a habit of listening more than he spoke. Teachers wrote "polite" and "keeps to himself" on his report cards. Kids at school didn't have much reason to remember his name. Machines remembered him, though. Broken radios, alarm clocks that had given up, an old toaster that burned on one side and did nothing on the other. Those things seemed to find him. There was a cardboard box under his bed, filled with screws, springs, and odd little parts he couldn't quite throw away. He liked knowing how things fit together. He liked figuring out which tiny piece made everything else work. That morning at Maple and 3rd, he took his usual place near the curb, close enough to hear the bus when it turned the corner, far enough from the other kids to be left alone. The girl was already there. She stood a little back from the street, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Her backpack looked heavy on her small shoulders, covered in keychains and patches that clinked softly when she moved. One patch, near the top, caught his eye. Round, red and white, with a winged skull stitched in the center. The stitching wasn't perfect, but it was careful. He'd seen that symbol once before, on the back of a leather vest outside Lawson's garage. He'd seen her too, in the hallway at school. 2nd grade. Brown hair that fell into her eyes. Denim jacket too big for her, sleeves rolled up, cuffs fraying. Teachers called her Maddie Lawson, in that half-gentle tone adults use when they know a kid has already seen more than she should. Kids drifted to the bus stop in small groups. 6th grade girls comparing phone cases. 7th graders trading jokes they'd never repeat in front of a parent. Somewhere down the block, a car door slammed. A father's voice reminded his son not to be late for practice. Then Brett Langley arrived. 13, tall, wearing a jacket with the school colors and the junior team logo stitched bold across the back. People made room for him without thinking about it. His sneakers were new. His laugh was loud. He carried himself like someone who'd rarely been told no and had never had it really mean anything. He spotted the patch on Maddie's backpack almost at once. "Well, would you look at that?" he said, voice carrying just enough to draw eyes his way. "Got us a little biker mascot." His friends snickered. One nudged his elbow. "Hey, isn't that like those guys your dad's always yelling about at the truck stop?" Brett stepped closer to Maddie, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to see him. She didn't. Her gaze stayed fixed on the sidewalk. "Where'd you get that, huh?" he asked, tapping the patch with 2 fingers. "You ride with some gang now?" She said nothing. Caleb recognized the way her shoulders crept up toward her ears, the way her hands tightened on the strap. Silent, small, hoping the storm would blow over. Brett's hand shot out and yanked the backpack off her shoulder. The weight of it jerked her sideways. A pencil case and a folded drawing slid out and landed near Caleb's shoe. "Hey," she said, barely audible. "Give it back." Brett swung the backpack lazily by the strap. "You want it?" he said. "Come take it." His friends laughed. One of them scooped up the drawing and held it up. It was a shaky pencil sketch of a motorcycle by the river. "Look at this," the boy said. "Trash on wheels." The laugh that followed wasn't big, but it was enough. No adults were watching. No teacher's car happened to roll past. A few kids glanced over, then away. Caleb felt his pulse in his throat. The safe thing to do was nothing. He could pretend he hadn't seen. He could stare at the street and wait for the bus. He could let the scene file away as one more moment of, "That's just how it is." But the part of him that knew machines knew exactly what he was looking at. Brett, at the center. His friends orbiting close, eager for approval. The ring of kids around them, far enough to deny, close enough to witness. Every piece in place, every gear turning the way past experience had set it turning. If nothing jammed that mechanism, it would roll right over Maddie Lawson and keep on going. Caleb's hands were damp. His heart hammered. He took one breath that felt too big for his narrow chest. Then he stepped forward. He walked until he was between Brett and the curb, close enough to see the small white scar near Brett's jaw, and smell the artificial citrus of his body spray. For a heartbeat, the bus stop went quiet. Caleb's voice came out soft, but it was steady. "Give it back," he said. "It's not yours." He didn't say it because he thought anyone would back him up. He didn't say it because he expected to be rewarded. He said it because, for the first time, doing nothing felt worse than whatever might happen next. Later, when engines shook the windows of Riverton's quiet streets and leather vests lined the walls of a crowded auditorium, people would talk about courage and consequences and whether bikers had any place at a school board meeting. But all of that started here, at Maple and 3rd, on a cool morning in October, when a small boy decided to put his thin body between cruelty and a girl with a patch on her backpack. The bus rounded the corner before anyone answered Caleb. For a second, Brett just stared at him, backpack strap hanging from his fist. You could almost see the gears turning. Surprise, annoyance, the flicker of calculation. Then he gave the strap a small jerk, hard enough that Maddie flinched. "Whatever," he muttered. He tossed the backpack. It sailed in a slow, ugly arc and landed on the sidewalk at Caleb's feet. Maddie scurried to grab it, fingers checking the patch first as if that little circle of cloth mattered more than anything inside. Brett bumped his shoulder hard into Caleb's as he walked past to the curb. "Watch yourself, Turner," he said quietly. "You just bought something you can't afford." The bus doors folded open with a hiss. The driver checked the mirrors, saw only kids standing where kids were supposed to stand, and waved them on. No one said a word about backpacks or patches or the way Maddie's hands shook when she fumbled her way up the steps. Caleb took a seat halfway back, the way he always did. Maddie slid into a seat near the front and hugged her bag to her chest. Brett and his friends took the back row, voices low and mean. The bus engine drowned most of it out. From the outside, it looked like any other morning. Inside Caleb's chest, something had shifted. Once you step out of a shadow, it's hard to pretend you're invisible again. The school day moved in its usual slow crawl. Bells rang. Teachers talked about fractions and state capitals. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Caleb answered when he was called on, kept his head down when he wasn't. A bruise was already blooming along one of his ribs where Brett had clipped him with an elbow as they squeezed through the bus aisle. "Everything all right, Caleb?" his homeroom teacher asked once, noticing the way he winced when he reached for a textbook. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Just slept funny." She nodded and moved on. He didn't blame her. Teachers saw a lot. They couldn't chase every shadow down the hallway. By afternoon, clouds had drifted in over Riverton, the kind that made the light go flat and gray. Practice days always made the school feel different. Posters with hand-painted slogans, "Go Tigers," "Friday Night Lights," hung crooked on the walls. Boys in practice jerseys walked a little taller. Coaches' whistles shrilled across the field. Caleb didn't play football. The program cost money, and his mother worked evenings. Besides, he preferred gears and wires to playbooks and drills. After the last bell, he stuffed his notebooks into his backpack and started the walk toward the bus lanes out back. He didn't see Brett until it was too late. "Hey, Turner." The voice came from behind him, half swallowed by the echo in the empty hallway. Caleb turned. Brett stood at the far end of the corridor, practice jersey half tucked, helmet dangling from one hand. Two of his friends flanked him, still in cleats, the sound of plastic on tile echoing with each step they took forward. The hallway was emptier than it looked during the day. Most kids had already spilled out toward buses, cars, or the field. Somewhere outside, a whistle blew, then blew again. "You walking to the bus?" Brett asked. Caleb's throat felt dry. "Yeah." "Not yet, you're not." They fell in around him like they were just three boys walking with a fourth. But when they reached the door that led to the back lot, Brett's hand closed around Caleb's backpack strap. "New route," he said. "Come on." The door to the bleachers wasn't locked. It never was. The concrete under them held the day's heat just long enough to make the air smell like dust and old sodas. From the right angle, the field microphones couldn't see you. From most angles, nobody was looking anyway. Caleb's feet scraped on the concrete as they ushered him under the metal ribs of the stands. The noise from the field dulled, as if someone had put a hand over the town's mouth. His pulse pounded in his ears. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Brett asked, dropping his helmet with a clatter. "Standing up for biker trash?" "It wasn't right," Caleb said. His voice sounded thin in the shadowy space. "What you did." Brett's jaw tightened. "You don't get to say what's right." The first shove knocked Caleb into one of the bleacher supports. Pain bloomed along his side. He tried to straighten up. A fist caught him in the shoulder. Someone's knee clipped his thigh. It wasn't a movie fight, with dramatic blows and shouted threats. It was uglier and smaller and meaner. A series of hard, careless hits from boys who'd never really learned what it felt like to be afraid. He tried to cover his head the way they taught in safety videos. An elbow glanced off the back of his skull anyway. When he sucked in a breath to cry out, something sharp hammered into his ribs. Fire shot through his chest. The world went watery at the edges. "Enough," one of the other boys muttered once, nerves creeping into his tone. Brett pulled his arm back for one more shot, then stepped back instead. His breath came fast. A flush burned high on his cheeks. "You remember this next time you want to play hero," he said. They left him there, on the cold concrete, with the echo of their cleats fading under the bleachers and the distant roar of a crowd that hadn't arrived yet but would, on Friday, to cheer for touchdowns and tackles. When Caleb tried to sit up, the left side of his chest screamed. He tasted metal in his mouth. The sky between the bleachers' slats looked too bright. At some point, someone must have found him. Later, he would remember only pieces, a face he half recognized, a teacher's voice that sounded too loud, the jostle of being rolled onto a stretcher, the world narrowing to the hiss of his own breath and the sharp smell of antiseptic. The emergency room at Riverton General had seen a lot over the years. Factory accidents back when there were still factories, farm mishaps, drunk driving crashes on the highway. The nurse who met the stretcher at the door had 30 years in. It still made something twist in her gut when it was a child. 10-year-old male, the EMT rattled off. Blunt force trauma to the left side, possible rib involvement, some bruising to the head, vital stable but he's guarding hard. "Sweetheart," the nurse said, leaning over him. "Can you tell me your name?" "Caleb," he whispered. Talking made his chest hurt. "Turner." "All right, Caleb. We're going to take care of you. Just keep breathing slow for me, okay?" The world became a series of rectangles, ceiling tiles, fluorescent lights, the square patch of sky he glimpsed as they rolled past a window. A doctor's face floated into view. Cold hands probed his ribs. The word fracture floated in the air. Then lucky. Then could have been worse. When they finally settled him in a room with a beeping monitor and thin blankets, he felt wrung out and hollow. His mother arrived 40 minutes later, apron still tied over her work clothes, name tag crooked, dark hair escaping her ponytail. Someone at the grocery store had answered the phone, listened, and said, "Go, we'll figure it out." She came through the doorway fast, then stopped as if she'd hit glass when she saw the bruises blooming across his face and the way the nurses had taped his ribs. "Oh, baby," she breathed, hand flying to her mouth. "What did they do to you?" He tried to smile. It came out crooked. "It's okay, Mom," he said, though it obviously wasn't. "They said it's just a crack. I'm fine." Her fingers trembled when she brushed hair from his forehead. "Who?" she asked, voice rough. "Who did this?" He hesitated, not because he wanted to protect Brett, but because saying it out loud made it real. "Brett," he said finally, "from the team, him and his friends, behind the bleachers." Something in her face went from fear to anger so quickly it almost startled him. "Why?" she asked. Caleb thought of Maddie's backpack, the patch, her hands shaking. "It started this morning at the bus stop," he said. "He took this little girl's bag. He was messing with her. I told him to stop." His mother closed her eyes briefly. "You and that soft heart," she said, not unkindly. "I'm proud of you, but I'm not letting this slide." She squeezed his hand once, then stepped out into the hallway. When she came back, she wasn't alone. The man who walked in behind her wore a tie that was just a little too expensive for a small-town school office and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. "Caleb," he said, as if they were old friends. "I'm Mr. Hopkins, the principal at your school. I am so sorry this happened." He pulled a plastic chair up beside the bed. Caleb's mother stayed standing, arms crossed tight. "We're going to get to the bottom of it," Hopkins said. "We already have some information about an incident behind the bleachers. We take this very seriously." "Good," Caleb's mother said. Then I assume you've called the police." Hopkins blinked. "Well," he said, "we're still gathering the facts, and in situations between students, he has a cracked rib," she snapped, pointing at Caleb. "That's not a situation. That's an assault." A second man stepped into the doorway then, as if he'd been waiting for his cue. He wore a sport coat over a golf shirt and carried himself like the room belonged to him. "Donna," he said smoothly, "let's not get ahead of ourselves." Caleb had seen him at games, shaking hands on the field, his company's logo splashed across the scoreboard and the back of the jerseys. "Mr. Langley," Hopkins said quickly, "I was just making sure this doesn't get blown out of proportion," Langley finished for him. He stepped closer to the bed, looking Caleb over the way a man might inspect a dent in his truck. "He's going to be all right, aren't you, son?" Caleb didn't answer. Langley's gaze slid to Caleb's mother. "Boy's roughhouse," he said. "Sometimes it goes too far. Nobody wants that, but we also don't want to destroy a child's future over a scuffle behind the bleachers." "A scuffle?" she repeated, incredulous. "Your son put my boy in the hospital." "Allegedly," Langley said, the word coming out smooth as oil. "We don't have the full picture yet." "We have enough," she said. "My son told you what happened. And there are other accounts," Hopkins added weakly. "Some of the boys say there was an argument, some pushing on both sides." "Of course they do," she said. "They're scared of your booster club." Hopkins flinched at the word. Langley's jaw tightened. "Donna," Langley said, lowering his voice as if he were being reasonable, "our company keeps that football program alive. We sponsor the district. We fund your son's math textbooks. I'm not your enemy here. I'm just asking you not to rush to police and lawyers when the school can handle this internally." "How?" she asked. "With a slap on the wrist?" "We're talking about a one-game suspension and some detention," Hopkins said quickly. "Mandatory counseling, a written apology. That's significant." Caleb watched his mother's shoulders go rigid. "If I'd done this to someone when I was his age," she said, "my father would have taken me to the station himself." Langley's smile thinned. "These are different times," he said. "Different pressures. College scouts look at records. We're not just talking about one boy. We're talking about the whole team, the whole town." There it was, laid out plain. Image over pain, future over fairness. The weight of a name over the cracked rib of a boy with nothing but a rented house and a tired mother to stand behind him. Hopkins shifted in his chair. "We'll put a note in Brett's file," he offered. "We'll review our policy. We're committed to keeping all our students safe." Caleb's mother looked from one man to the other. The principal with his careful phrases, the businessman with his practiced charm. "Safe," she repeated. "My son isn't safe if kids like Brett learn they can do this and have grown men cover for them." She wanted to fight more. Caleb could see it in the set of her jaw. But he could also see the way her hand trembled on the bed rail, the weight of rent and grocery bills and missed shifts sitting heavy on her shoulders. There are some battles you know you're outnumbered for before they even start. She drew in a shaky breath. "So that's it?" she asked. "Detention and missing one game?" "For now," Hopkins said. "We'll continue to monitor the situation." Langley nodded as if a deal had been made. "I'm sure we can all move forward from this," he said. Caleb lay still, feeling every tender inch of his side. Move forward. The three of them might. His mother might, because she had to. But the machine he'd stepped in front of that morning had just taught every kid watching a lesson. If you hurt the right child, the town will bend to keep you standing. If you protect the wrong one, you're on your own. If you've ever watched adults protect the powerful instead of the small, you already understand what settled in Caleb's chest that day. A mix of pain and quiet, smoldering disappointment. What none of them in that hospital room could see yet was that a girl with a biker patch on her backpack would carry this story home. And in a garage on the edge of Riverton, a man with gray in his beard and a lifetime of loyalty stitched into his vest, would listen very carefully. Hank Lawson noticed the change before anyone said a word. Most afternoons, his granddaughter burst into the garage like a gust of wind, backpack thumping, stories spilling out, questions flying faster than he could answer them. She'd hop up on the old stool by the workbench, kicking her heels against the metal, and narrate her day while he worked. Spelling tests, cafeteria drama, what the art teacher had said about her drawings. 2 days after Caleb's trip to the hospital, she slipped in like she was trying not to disturb the air. The bell over the garage door gave its usual tired jingle. Hank looked up from the rusted pickup he'd been coaxing back to life. Maddie stood in the doorway, backpack held in both hands like a shield instead of slung over one shoulder. "Hey, Bug," he said, wiping grease off his hands onto a rag. "You're quiet. Bus lose its horn or something?" She tried for a smile and didn't quite make it. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. He watched her for a second. The river light slanting in through the open bay door caught the edge of the patch on her bag, the red and white circle he'd sewn on himself one late night while she colored at the kitchen table. "You eating okay?" he asked gently. "School going all right?" Her fingers tightened on the straps. Her shoulders crept up toward her ears. Hank Lawson had spent 50-odd years watching people lie to themselves and each other. On highways, in bars, in hospital waiting rooms. He knew what fear looked like when it tried to hide. He set the rag down. "Come here," he said. She stepped closer, the smell of school hallways and cafeteria tater tots drifting with her. Up close, he could see the faint yellowing shadow of a bruise under her jacket collar, half concealed. Not the kind you get from falling off a swing. He reached out, slow enough that she could pull away if she wanted. She didn't. He touched the edge of the patch on her backpack. "Is this about this thing?" he asked. "Somebody giving you trouble over it?" Her eyes flicked up to his. For a moment, the tough little face she tried to wear, the one she'd copied from photos of riders lined up beside their bikes, crumbled. "It's not about me," she said in a rush. "It's about a boy." Hank waited. You didn't rush a story out of somebody who'd finally decided to tell it. "At the bus stop," she said. "Brett and his friends, they took my bag. They were saying stuff about you, about them." She nodded at the patch. "This boy, he told them to give it back. Then they—" Her voice snagged. "They hurt him. Behind the bleachers. He went to the hospital." Hank's jaw tightened. "Who?" he asked quietly. "Caleb," she said. "Caleb Turner. He's in 4th grade. He doesn't even know me. He just stepped in." The garage seemed to narrow around them. Hank had ridden with the Hells Angels longer than Maddie had been alive. He knew what people thought when they saw the patch on his back. To some, it meant trouble. To others, it meant trouble for the people who liked to pick on the weak. To him, it meant something simple. You don't stand by and watch when someone smaller takes a hit that was meant for you. "He all right?" Hank asked. She shook her head a little, as if the question didn't have an easy answer. "Mom said he cracked a rib," she said. "They had to take him in an ambulance. He looked bad." Hank felt the old anger rise, the kind that started deep in the chest and spread up into the throat. It wasn't the hot, reckless fury of a young man looking for a fight. It was the slow, steady burn of someone who'd seen this pattern too many times. Strong kids learning they were untouchable. Poor kids learning the opposite. "What did the school do?" he asked. Maddie's mouth twisted. "They talked to Brett," she said. "They said it was just boys messing around. His dad was there. He's on the board. They're not calling the police. They said Caleb is very brave, and we're all moving forward." Hank closed his eyes briefly. He could almost see the scene. The principal with his hands folded, the businessman in the nice jacket, the worn-out mom trying to decide how much of a fight she could afford. "Does Caleb's mama know about you?" he asked. "About us?" Maddie shook her head. "She doesn't know me at all," she said. "Nobody knows it was about you. They think Caleb just started something. But he didn't. He was helping me." The way she said it, like a confession, like a debt, landed heavier than any wrench in Hank's hand. "Come here," he said again. She stepped close enough that he could rest a big hand on her small shoulder. "In this family," he said slowly, "we don't let people bleed for us in the dark and pretend it didn't happen. You understand?" Her eyes filled, but she nodded. "So here's what we're going to do," he said. "First, you're going to go inside and get that sketchbook of yours. You're going to draw something that makes you feel a little less like hiding. Then you're going to eat the sandwich I know you've got stuffed in that bag. That's your job." "What's your job?" she asked. He gave her a tired smile. "Mine?" he said. "I'm going to make a few phone calls." After she'd gone into the small office to raid the mini fridge and dig out her markers, Hank walked over to the pegboard on the wall. His vest hung there, heavy with patches won and stitched over years of wind and weather. He slipped it on, the leather settling over his shoulders like a familiar weight. On a shelf near the old rotary phone sat a dog-eared notebook filled with numbers. Some had area codes from an era before cell phones. A few had been crossed out over the years, riders gone to steady jobs or early graves. Enough remained. He flipped to a page marked with a scribbled "In KYOO." The first call went to a man in Bloomington who answered on the second ring. "Yeah?" "It's Hank," he said. "You busy?" "Doing oil in a 13-year-old Civic," the man replied. "What's up, brother?" "I got a kid here in Riverton," Hank said. 10 years old. Stepped in when some board member's golden boy was working over my granddaughter at the bus stop. Broke up what those boys thought they had a right to do. They paid him back behind the bleachers, hospital, cracked rib, school's smoothing it over. You can guess the rest." A pause. The faint sound of a shop radio in the background. "Kid's name?" the man asked. "Caleb Turner," Hank said. "Mama's working the grocery to keep the lights on. No patch, no money, no pull. Just did the right thing." Another pause, heavier this time. "What do you need?" the man asked. "Presents," Hank said. "Nothing stupid. Nothing that gets us hauled in. I want those people to feel how big that boy's backup really is when they look down from their little board table. I want them to understand they can't teach kids this lesson for free." "Got it," the man said. "I'll talk to the chapter. We can ride down Saturday." Hank made more calls. To a chapter near Louisville. To riders outside Cincinnati. To a couple of old friends who didn't wear the patch anymore, but still understood what it meant when one of them said, "We've got a kid who took a beating for us." Some couldn't come. Age, jobs, bad knees. Enough could. By the time Maddie came back out, clutching a fresh drawing of a motorcycle roaring down a road that looked suspiciously like Maple Street, Hank had a rough count in his head. "Grandpa?" she asked softly. "What are you going to do?" He wiped a spot of grease from her cheek with his thumb. "Town's got a school board meeting Saturday morning," he said. "They'll talk about bus routes and budgets and if they're feeling real brave, maybe what happened to Caleb. I figure I'll drop by. Maybe bring a few friends. Stay quiet. Listen. Then tell them what we think." "Will they be mad?" she asked. "Probably," he said. "People get twitchy when you make them look at what they've done." "Will you hurt them?" It came out in a small rush, the way kids ask questions they've been afraid to say out loud. He shook his head. "No, Bug," he said. "We don't do that. We stand there and remind them that some of us still remember what words like right and wrong mean. We use our voices, our wallets, and the fact that a lot of people get real careful when they see this patch in a room." He tapped the emblem on his chest. She studied it, then him. Will Caleb be there? She asked. If his mama lets him, Hank said. If he's up to it. He pictured a skinny boy with taped ribs walking into an auditorium full of grown-ups who'd already decided his pain was an inconvenience. The thought made his hands curl into loose fists. I want him to see something, Hank added. I want him to know he didn't stand alone on that sidewalk, even if it feels like it right now. That night, as the town settled into its routines, TV sets glowing blue in living rooms, dishwashers humming, factory whistles long silent, headlights cut through the dark along the highway, pairs of bikes, a small pack of 3, a lone rider with his shoulders set against the wind. They came from up the river and down it, from farm roads and city streets. Some pulled into Hank's driveway, engines idling low before they shut them off and stretched stiff backs. Others would roll in at dawn, following the directions scribbled on gas station receipts. No one in Riverton was counting yet. No one in the school district office had any idea how many vests would be standing quietly in the back of their auditorium come Saturday. But a man who ran a little garage at the edge of town had started his own kind of lesson plan. And somewhere in a rented house not far away, a boy tried to sleep through the ache in his side, with no idea that a line of motorcycles was already forming in his name. Saturday came up gray and cold over Riverton. A thin mist clung to the river, turning the old factories into shadows. Streetlights clicked off one by one. Coffee makers sputtered to life in kitchen after kitchen. It felt, for a few quiet minutes, like any other small-town morning. Then the engine started. The first pair of bikes eased off the highway just after 7, turning onto the road that led past Lawson's garage. Their headlights cut through the fog, beams sliding over the peeling sign and the row of pickup trucks parked out front. Hank was already outside, vest on, hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He raised his chin in greeting as the riders rolled in. One after another, they turned into the gravel lot, engines downshifting, tires crunching. Within half an hour, a dozen machines sat shoulder to shoulder. Then 2 dozen. Then more. They didn't roar in, trying to shake the town awake. They moved like men who knew the difference between a statement and a stunt. Kickstands went down. Helmets came off. Stiff backs were stretched. Hands found each other in brief, firm grips. Long time, Hank. Good to see you upright, old man. You sure know how to pick a Saturday. He smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. Appreciate you coming, he said over and over. Kid's name is Caleb. You'll see him soon enough? A few wives and partners climbed out of support cars, walking around to rub their shoulders, sipping gas station coffee from paper cups. Maddie watched from the office doorway, sketchbook pressed to her chest, wide eyes taking in the sea of patches and faces. One of the riders noticed her staring, tipped 2 fingers off his forehead in a small salute, and went back to talking. By 8, the lot was full. Bikes lined the shoulder of the road in both directions. A neighbor stood on his porch in a faded robe, smoking and counting under his breath. He lost track somewhere around 300 and gave up, shaking his head. Down at the station, 2 officers leaned over the radio. You got eyes on this? One of them asked, watching a patrol car camera feed. They're headed up Maple. Lot of them. His partner squinted at the screen, then at the printout on the clipboard. They're not speeding, he said. Plates look clean. No one's blocking intersections or doing anything stupid. They're just there. The first officer hesitated. You think we need extra units at the school? He asked. We're already there for the meeting, his partner said. If they're going to sit in the back and listen, that's their right. If they try anything else, we'll deal with it. Don't borrow trouble. The column pulled out from Lawson's garage in waves, like a tide that knew exactly where it was going. Hank rode near the front, Maddie's drawing tucked carefully into the inside pocket of his vest. The road from the edge of town to the high school wound past small houses with sagging porches, a church with a cracked stained glass window, and a park where the swing chains squeaked in the cold air. People stopped what they were doing to watch. A man raking leaves leaned on his handle and counted beats between engines. A woman in a bathrobe held her phone up to record, thumb fumbling with the screen. Kids pressed their faces to windows. In one dining room, an older couple eating toast fell silent, coffee mugs halfway to their mouths. 350 bikes is not something you ignore, no matter how much you want to. At the rented house, Caleb sat carefully on the edge of the couch, arms wrapped around his middle. The tape on his ribs itched. His mom checked the clock, checked him, and checked the clock again. "You sure you're up for this?" she asked. He nodded. "I want to go," he said. "You said they're going to talk about what happened." She didn't say what she was thinking. That talking about it might mean a lot of smooth words and very little else. Instead, she helped him into his jacket, slow and careful, and tried not to wince for him when he sat back down too fast. The sound hit their windows a moment later. A distant rumble, then a closer one. The glasses in the kitchen cupboard rattled against each other. The thin walls carried the vibration straight through the small house and into their chests. Caleb's mother frowned and stepped to the front window. She lifted the curtain. Her mouth fell open a little. "Mom?" Caleb asked. She didn't answer right away. She was too busy watching the river of bikes flow up the hill toward the high school. "What is it?" he pressed. She let the curtain fall back into place and turned to him, eyes wide. "I think," she said slowly, "somebody else decided they're not okay with what happened to you either." They left 5 minutes later, walking because the car's transmission had been complaining for months, and she didn't want to risk it on the incline. Caleb moved carefully, each step measured. The chill air bit at his cheeks. Every engine he heard on the wind made his chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with his ribs. The high school sat on a rise at the edge of town, the kind of brick building that tried very hard to look more confident than the budget allowed. Its parking lot was already a maze. Pickups, sedans, minivans, a scattering of aging compacts, and around, between, and along the edges, rows of motorcycles, lined up in neat, respectful lines. Off to one side, a cluster of patrol cars. The officers stood beside them, not blocking the doors, just present. "Stay close to me," his mother murmured. He nodded, though he wasn't sure if she was saying it for his sake or her own. As they walked toward the front doors, a murmur rippled through the bikers. Heads turned. Hank, standing near the sidewalk, saw Maddie point. "That's him," she whispered. "The boy." Hank took a breath and stepped forward. He didn't look like the monster some people imagined when they thought Hell's Angels. He looked like what he was, a man in his 60s with tired eyes, gray in his beard, and hands that had spent a lifetime turning wrenches. "Caleb?" he asked. The boy stopped, standing a little straighter despite the tape under his shirt. "Yes, sir," Caleb said. Hank glanced at the bruises on the boy's face, the way he protected his left side without even thinking about it. Then he looked him in the eyes. "You don't know me," Hank said. "Name's Hank Lawson. That little firecracker over there is my granddaughter." Maddie gave a small, awkward wave. "I heard what you did at that bus stop," Hank went on. "You stepped in when those boys came after her, and you paid for it. I don't have a word big enough to cover that, but I wasn't going to let you walk in here today thinking you were alone." He stepped aside and nodded toward the rows of riders. "You got 350 people behind you this morning," he said quietly. "We're not here to scare you. We're here so that when those folks up on that stage start talking about moving forward and boys being boys, they know we heard every word." Caleb swallowed. The ache in his ribs seemed to fade for a moment under the weight of what Hank was saying. His mother spoke up, voice tight. "I appreciate you coming," she said, "but I don't want any trouble. They already think we're making a fuss." Hank nodded. "I understand," he said. "We're not here to flip tables or throw punches. We're going to sit in the back, listen, and then I'm going to tell them exactly what they taught every kid in this town when they protected that boy over your son. After that, we're going to put some money on the table to fix what we can fix." "Money?" she asked, taken aback. "For cameras on those buses. For a counselor who has time to do more than shuffle forms. For your boy's schooling, if you'll let us. We don't just ride up, yell, and vanish. That doesn't change much." Her eyes glistened. "You don't owe us anything," she said. Hank shook his head. "You're wrong about that," he said. "Your son stepped between my family and a beating he didn't earn. We owe him more than I can pay back. Today's a start." He didn't offer a hug. He didn't reach for her hand. He just stepped back and gave them room to walk through the double doors. Inside, the high school auditorium buzzed with the low, nervous hum of a town that knew something unusual was happening and wasn't sure yet how it felt about it. Rows of brown seats filled slowly. Parents in work clothes, a few teachers still in their Friday ties, kids dragged along and told to sit up straight. On the stage, a long table faced the crowd, covered with a blue cloth and dotted with nameplates. Mr. Hopkins sat near the middle, shuffling papers, his tie a little too tight. Next to him, the superintendent checked her phone. On the end, in a crisp jacket with the school logo pin on the lapel, sat Mr. Langley. He leaned back in his chair, as if he were at a fundraiser instead of a hearing. A microphone on a stand waited at the aisle nearest the stage. At the back of the room, double doors swung open quietly. Heads turned. The first few riders stepped in and moved to the walls, taking up positions along the sides and back of the room. They didn't speak. They didn't swagger. They just stood, hands folded in front of them or resting lightly on belt buckles, eyes forward. More followed, filling in the gaps. Leather vests along both walls, logos muted under the dim lights. Some faces young, some deeply lined. A few women in denim jackets with the same patch over the heart. The air changed, the way it does when a storm moves close. People in the seats shifted. A mother reached for her child's hand. A father's jaw clenched. A teacher who had seen a lot over the years felt a prickle up the back of her neck. Not fear, exactly, but awareness. Near the front, Caleb and his mother slipped into a row. Maddie sat on his other side, backpack at her feet, hand hovering near his elbow, as if she weren't sure whether she was allowed to hold on. On stage, Hopkins tapped his microphone. "If everyone could find a seat," he said, voice cracking a little on the last word, "we'll go ahead and get started. This is a regularly scheduled school board meeting, and we have a full agenda this morning." A murmur went through the room at the word regularly. Nothing about the crowd, the vests, or the way the officers near the doors were standing said regular. They ran through the formalities first. Call to order, roll call, approval of last month's minutes, budget adjustments for textbooks, a new contract for cafeteria suppliers. On any other Saturday, half the room would have been empty and the other half asleep. Today, every word hung in the air, like everyone was waiting for the one line that actually mattered. Finally, the superintendent cleared her throat. "We're now moving into the portion of the meeting addressing student safety," she said. "As you know, there was an incident on school grounds earlier this week involving several middle school students. The district takes all such incidents seriously, and we are reviewing policies to ensure—" A woman in the second row let out a short, incredulous laugh. She clapped a hand over her mouth, but the sound had already escaped. The superintendent's gaze flicked toward her, then toward the back of the room, where a wall of leather watched without blinking. "As I was saying," she continued, we will be hearing from concerned parents and community members. We ask that everyone remain respectful. Please remember that this is a forum for constructive discussion. She gestured toward the microphone stand. If you wish to speak, she said, you may line up at the aisle. We will limit comments to 3 minutes per person. For a moment, no one moved. Then a man in a work shirt and steel-toed boots stood, jaw set, and stepped into the aisle. Behind him, a woman in a church dress rose, clutching a folded paper. 2 more parents followed. The line formed quickly, a mix of anger, fear, and something like exhaustion. They spoke first, about bullying on buses, about kids coming home with bruises and excuses, about reports that seemed to vanish into office drawers. One mother's voice shook as she described her daughter's nightmares. A father's words were rough with the effort of keeping his temper in check. The board listened, some members taking notes, others staring past the microphone at the far wall. When the first wave of parents finished, the line thinned. It didn't disappear. A chair scraped softly at the back of the room. Hank stepped into the aisle. He didn't hurry. Years on the road had taught him the value of pacing. He walked down between the rows of seats, boots thudding dully on the carpet. As he passed, a few kids craned their necks to see the patch on his back. A few adults looked away, not sure where to rest their eyes. He reached the microphone and took a breath. Up on stage, Mr. Langley's expression tightened. Hopkins stared fixedly at his papers, though he wasn't reading them. The superintendent folded her hands and tried to appear calm. Sir, she said, please state your name and address for the record. Hank adjusted the microphone down a notch. His voice, when it came, was calm and rough-edged, carrying just fine without the speakers. My name's Hank Lawson, he said. I run the little garage down by the river. My address is on about half the receipts in this town if you want to check it. A few chuckles rippled, nervous and brief. And I'm here, he continued, because 3 days ago, your school let a 10-year-old boy take the kind of beating a grown man would think twice about giving, and then you told his mama it was a scuffle. The room went very still. He glanced toward Caleb, then back at the board. I ride with some of the men and women standing along your walls today, he said. You don't need me to explain what this patch on my back means. You've seen the news. You've heard the stories. Some of them are true. A lot of them ain't. But I'll tell you what it means in my house. It means if somebody takes a hit for your family, you don't let the world pretend it didn't happen. He rested both hands lightly on the top of the microphone stand, steady as if he were leaning on a fence post, not a piece of metal. I'm not here to scare anybody, he said. I'm here to talk about what you taught every kid in Riverton when you chose to protect a name over a boy with nothing but a cracked rib and a tired mama. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. Every person in the auditorium was leaning forward now, even the ones who'd come in determined to disapprove. On the stage, the superintendent opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time that morning, Mr. Langley's confident smile faltered. Hank took another breath. Let me tell you, he said, how this looked from where we're standing. And that was where the story turned. Let me tell you how this looked from where we're standing, Hank said. He didn't look at the bikers along the walls when he said we. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room knew who he meant. 3 mornings ago, he went on, my granddaughter is standing at a bus stop, minding her own business, carrying a backpack with a patch on it that I sewed on myself. Some older boys decide that's a good enough reason to make her their entertainment. They take her bag, they scare her, they talk about her family like we're trash. He nodded once toward Maddie. She stared at her shoes, cheeks red. A boy she doesn't even know steps forward, Hank said. He's 10. He's thin. He's not on your football posters, and nobody's printing his name on the back of a jersey. He looks at those boys and tells them to give her bag back because it's not theirs. That's it. That's the crime." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people had heard pieces of this. Most had not heard it laid out so cleanly. "Later that day," Hank continued, "those same boys take him under the bleachers and show him what it costs to say no to them. They hit him until his ribs crack and his head rings. They leave him on the concrete like a piece of gear they're done with." He didn't linger on the details. He didn't need to. A lot of people in the room had seen enough fights to fill in the blanks. "The next part is where you come in," he said, eyes shifting to the board. "His mama gets a call no parent wants. She leaves her job, drives to the hospital, sees her boy taped up and trying to pretend he's all right. She comes to you. She asks for help. She asks for justice." He let the word hang there a moment. "And what does she get?" he asked. "She gets words like incident and boys being boys. She gets told that calling the police would be rushing to extremes. She gets reminded who buys the jerseys and whose checks keep the lights on at Friday night games." On the stage, Mr. Langley's jaw flexed. "That's not a fair characterization," he began. Hank held up a hand. "I didn't interrupt anybody else," he said quietly. "I've got 3 minutes, same as the rest." The superintendent glanced at the clock at the back of the room. "Go ahead, Mr. Lawson," she said. Hank nodded once. "Here's what you taught every kid in this town," he said. "You didn't just teach Caleb. Kids watch how grown folks act, and they learn the rules that way. You taught them that if you've got the right last name, if your daddy sits on the right board and sponsors the right team, the worst thing that happens when you knock the wind out of a smaller kid is you miss a football game." He scanned the room slowly. "You taught them that if you do nothing while someone is being hurt, if you keep your head down and stay quiet, the adults will call you good kids and tell your parents you're no trouble. You taught them that stepping in, saying, 'Stop,' might land you in a hospital bed with a nice speech about bravery and a thin file in some office drawer." He shifted his weight, the leather of his vest creaking softly. "I ride with men who've done their time, men who carry regrets, men who have stories you don't want your kids to repeat," he said. "But I'll tell you this. Where I come from, if you watch a smaller person get beaten for doing the right thing, and your first concern is a score on a scoreboard, we've got words for that. None of them are leader." A few people in the audience murmured agreement. Others stared straight ahead, faces unreadable. Hank's gaze found Caleb again. "That boy over there," he said, "stepped between my granddaughter and a bad day she would have carried for the rest of her life. He didn't do it because we asked him to. He didn't do it because there was any benefit in it. He did it because something in him couldn't stand to see what was happening." He looked back at the board. "You failed him," he said simply. "Not once, but twice. First, when you let that culture grow under your noses. Second, when you decided protecting your reputation and a booster's son mattered more than telling the truth about what happened under those bleachers." Silence pressed in around his words. The superintendent cleared her throat. "Mr. Lawson," she said carefully, "we understand you're upset, but the district is handling this matter. We've imposed discipline. What discipline?" a voice called from the side. It was the woman who'd laughed earlier. "Missing one game and writing, 'Sorry I broke your ribs' on notebook paper?" A few people snorted. Others shifted, uncomfortable. "We can't discuss specific student discipline in a public forum," Hopkins said, seizing on the familiar line. "Confidentiality laws? You had no trouble discussing my son's behavior with me," Caleb's mother said sharply from her seat. "How he might have provoked things. How maybe he escalated the conflict. You weren't worried about confidentiality then." The board members traded glances. Hank let the room simmer for a heartbeat, then spoke again. "I'm not asking you to drag a kid up here and humiliate him," he said. I don't get much satisfaction from watching a 13-year-old twist in the wind. I'm asking you to fix the message. You can't undo what happened to Caleb, but you can decide what lesson gets burned into everybody's memory." He straightened a little. "So here's what we're going to do," he said. "Not just what you're going to do. What we are." He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Me and some of the folks along these walls talked," he said. "We scraped what we could. Some of us have done all right. Some of us not so much. But together, we came up with enough to start something we're calling the Stand Tall Fund." He unfolded the paper. "First piece," he said. "We're putting up money to cover this boy's education from here through a vocational program or college. That's tuition, books, and fees. He keeps his head in his work, we keep our end. You don't get to pat him on the head for being brave and then leave him to limp his way through life with nothing." A murmur swept the room. Caleb's mother stared at Hank, stunned. "Second," he said, "we're making a donation to the district. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to do 3 things if you've got the spine to accept it with the conditions we're putting on it." He held up a finger. 1. Cameras on every bus that runs kids in this town. Not just mounted, but working. Footage reviewed when there's a complaint. Not to spy, but to keep kids from having to convince you their pain is real. A second finger. 2. Fund a full-time counselor in this middle school whose job is student safety. Not punishment. Not just paperwork. Someone kids can go to when something's wrong, who has the time to listen and the authority to push when offices like yours get comfortable. A third. 3. You put real, written policy in place that says violence like what happened to Caleb is grounds for serious, automatic consequences, no matter who did it or who their daddy plays golf with. No more boys will be boys. No more we'll handle it quietly. You put it in writing. You send it home to every parent. You explain it to every kid. He folded the paper again, neat and small. "Our money comes with that string attached," he said. "You don't want the string, we'll take the money down the road to a district that does. I guarantee you someone will be happy to rip those checks out of my hand." On stage, the board members looked at one another, the way people do when they realize a decision has wandered out of the safe shadows and into the light. The superintendent leaned toward the microphone. "These are very generous offers," she said carefully. "But we can't make financial or policy commitments on the spot under pressure." Hank nodded slowly. "I understand you need to read the fine print," he said. "Take your time. But understand this, too. The pressure you're feeling right now is not because there are motorcycles in your parking lot. It's because, for once, you can't pretend nobody's watching." He turned slightly toward the crowd. "I've got nothing against your football team," he said. "I like a good game as much as anyone. But if the lesson kids take from this is scoreboard first, spine second, then what exactly are you building here?" His eyes found Mr. Langley. "You sit on this board, and you write checks with your company's logo on them," Hank said. "Folks are grateful for that. But money doesn't give you the right to define what's right and wrong in this town. It's time your boy learned that, too." Langley's face had gone a careful shade of neutral. "My son will face consequences appropriate to," he began. "No," Caleb's mother cut in, standing. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. "He'll face the consequences you've been shielding him from his whole life, or he'll learn that someone always will. That's what this is about." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then one of the other board members, an older woman with silver hair and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, cleared her throat. "I move," she said, "that we accept Mr. Lawson's donation in principle, subject to legal review, and that we commit, today, to cameras on our middle and elementary buses, and to drafting a zero-tolerance policy for violent assaults that does not distinguish by family name or team status." Another board member, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, lifted his hand. "Second," he muttered. The superintendent blinked, then nodded. "All in favor?" she asked. Hands went up. "Not all, but enough." "Motion carries," she said. A ripple moved through the room. Relief, surprise, a low note of something like hope. It wasn't a cheering crowd at a game. It was quieter than that. Older. Heavier. "And as for the student involved," the silver-haired board member said, glancing toward Langley, "I will be recommending to the discipline committee that we revisit the sanctions. A one-game suspension does not send the message this community needs sent." Langley's mouth thinned. He didn't speak. The math was changing in real time, and he knew it. Hank inclined his head slightly. "That's a start," he said. "You're going to need to follow through when these vests aren't standing along your walls. Kids are going to be watching. So are we." He stepped back from the microphone. As he walked up the aisle, some people looked away. Others nodded. A few reached out, almost without thinking, to touch his arm as he passed, like he was carrying something heavy they wanted, for a second, to help hold. When he reached Caleb's row, he stopped. "I meant what I said about that fund," he told the boy quietly. "We'll work out the details with your mama. You just focus on healing up and doing whatever work you want this life to be." Caleb swallowed. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "Thank you," he said, for all of this." Hank shook his head. "Don't thank me," he said. "You already paid your share. Now it's our turn." If you've ever sat in a room where the balance finally tipped away from "that's just how it is" toward "maybe it doesn't have to be," you know the feel of the air right then, thin and bright and fragile. Riverton wasn't fixed by a single vote or a handful of checks. But on that gray Saturday morning, in a high school auditorium full of parents, teachers, officers, and riders, something in the town's story bent a few degrees closer to straight. When the meeting finally adjourned, people didn't rush for the exits the way they usually did. They stood in the aisles and whispered instead. A few came up to the microphone just to ask how to sign up for the policy committee. Teachers compared the board's motion to the cases they'd seen slide sideways over the years. A couple of teenagers lurked near the back, trying to look uninterested and failing. Outside, the parking lot felt different than it had that morning. The bikes were still there, lines of chrome and color in the gray light. But the riders weren't just leaning against their machines anymore. They were talking. With parents, with kids, with the officers posted at the edge of the lot. Caleb stepped carefully down the auditorium stairs, his mother beside him, Maddie hovering close. Every jolt of his feet on the concrete sent a reminder through his ribs, but the pain seemed somehow smaller than it had going in. At the bottom of the steps, Mr. Hopkins intercepted them, tie loosened now, face pale. "Ms. Turner," he said. "Caleb, I wanted to say—" He swallowed. "We mishandled this. I mishandled this. I let myself be more afraid of headlines than of failing you. I can't ask you to forget that, but I hope you'll let us make some of it right." Caleb's mother looked at him for a long moment. "Start by writing the report the way it happened," she said. "Put it on paper that my son didn't exchange words or mutually engage. He stepped in to protect a girl who never should have needed protecting." Hopkins nodded. "I will," he said, "and there will be a different suspension on the books come Monday. A real one, for all involved." Behind him, Mr. Langley stood near a patrol car, speaking quietly with one of the officers. His shoulders drooped in a way they hadn't at the start of the morning. Brett wasn't there. He'd been sent home with his mother midway through the meeting, her face drawn tight as a drum. Consequences had started to move. They wouldn't fix everything. But they were moving. Hank waited near the edge of the lot, hands in his vest pockets, watching Caleb and his mother approach. "You did all right in there," he said to her quietly. Most folks would have stayed sitting. She gave a small, tired laugh. "I'm not sure I had a choice," she said. "He's my boy." Hank nodded. "That's how it's supposed to work," he said. "Grown folks stand up for kids. When they don't, sometimes somebody else has to roll in and remind them." He turned to Caleb. "You up to a quick stop before you go home?" he asked. "Maddie's been worrying herself sick about whether you'd ever set foot at our place." Caleb glanced at his mother. She hesitated, then nodded once. "An hour," she said. "Then we ice those ribs again." Hank grinned. "Deal," he said. "I've got folding chairs softer than my couch back at the house." Lawson's garage smelled like oil and old stories. The bay doors were half open, letting in the cool air. Tools hung on the wall in neat rows. An old radio in the corner murmured a classic country station underneath it all. Hank cleared a space on a workbench and motioned Caleb over. "Sit," he said. "We'll keep you away from anything heavier than a lug nut." Caleb lowered himself onto the stool, careful, every movement measured. "You like taking things apart, I hear," Hank said. "I guess," Caleb said. "Radios. Clocks. Whatever people throw away." Hank reached under the bench and pulled out a cardboard box. Inside sat a jumble of metal and rubber. "This here," he said, "is an old carburetor off a bike that gave up the ghost years ago. Too far gone for the road. But there are still pieces in here that know what they were made for. You want to help me figure out which ones are worth saving?" Caleb's fingers itched in a way that had nothing to do with healing bruises. "Yes, sir," he said. As he sifted through screws and springs and little brass jets, listening to Hank explain what each did, something unclenched inside him. His world had shrunk to the size of the workbench, parts and purpose, problems and fixes. In the office doorway, Maddie watched, hugging her backpack. After a minute, she stepped inside. "Caleb?" she said. He looked up. "Yeah?" She hesitated, then blurted it out before she could lose her nerve. "I'm sorry," she said. "That you got hurt. Because of me." He shook his head. "It wasn't because of you," he said. "It was because of them." She blinked. "Thank you," she said. He shrugged, wincing a little. "Someone had to say something," he replied. "Guess it was my turn." Hank listened to that small exchange and felt something old and stubborn in him relax. The world could be cruel, but it hadn't managed to knock all the decent out of people yet. Over the weeks that followed, the promises from that Saturday morning turned into steps on the ground. Contractors installed cameras on the buses, kids watching them with the wary curiosity of people meeting a new neighbor. The district posted a letter on its website and mailed copies home, laying out a new code. Any violent assault would bring real, escalating consequences, regardless of who threw the first punch or whose name sat on the booster plaque. Some parents grumbled. Some celebrated. Some shrugged and said, "About time." A counselor's office at the middle school got a fresh coat of paint and a door sign that said "Student Support" instead of "Discipline." Kids started finding their way there, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone. The stories that came out weren't all dramatic, but they were all real. At the next board meeting, fewer leather vests lined the walls, but a few still did. The message had sunk in. People were watching, even when the parking lot was quiet. As for Caleb, healing was slow but steady. He moved from wincing at every breath to testing careful stretches. The bruises faded from angry purple to jaundiced yellow, and finally disappeared. The tape came off his ribs, leaving only a ghost of tenderness as the Stand Tall Fund paperwork wound its way through banks and offices. Caleb's mother spent evenings at the kitchen table with forms and phone calls, wary at first, then slowly convinced this wasn't some cruel joke the world was playing on her. "You sure about this?" she asked Hank one night at the garage, flipping through the pages. "This is a lot." Hank shrugged. "Some of us wasted money on things that didn't matter much for a long time," he said. "Feels good to put it somewhere that might." Caleb found reasons to stop by Lawson's garage more often. At first it was under the excuse of dropping Maddie off, or returning a wrench. Eventually the excuses gave up, and he just started showing up. The box under his bed slowly emptied as he moved his favorite salvaged parts to a new home in a labeled drawer next to Hank's tools. On afternoons when homework was light and his mother's shift ran late, he'd sit at the workbench, learning to tell by sound when an engine was out of tune, by smell when oil had gone bad, by feel when a bolt was about to strip. "You've got the hands for this," Hank told him once, watching him thread a tiny piece into place. "Careful and patient. That's half the job." "The other half?" Caleb asked. "Not letting people talk you into cutting corners," Hank said. "Machines or morals." Years passed, as they do, one season at a time. Riverton didn't transform overnight. The factories didn't roar back to life. Main Street still had more empty windows than full ones. But some things shifted. Kids thought twice on the bus when someone started trouble, glancing up at the camera lens above the driver. Not because the lens was magic, but because they knew there was a record now, something that couldn't be smoothed over with a shrug and a handshake. The counselor's office stayed busy, sometimes with tears, sometimes with anger, sometimes with the quiet numbness that can be worse than both. He kept a bowl of butterscotch candies on his desk and a copy of the new district policy pinned to his wall. Every fall, the Stand Tall Fund gave out at least one scholarship, sometimes for college, sometimes for a trade program, to a kid who'd stepped in when it would have been easier not to. The criteria were simple: witness statements, a little paperwork, and a story that made the board of riders nod slowly and say, "Yeah, that's one of ours, even if they don't know it yet." Caleb grew taller. His shoulders broadened. The scar along his rib faded to a pale line. He finished high school with grades solid enough to make his mother's eyes shine when she opened his report cards. When it came time to choose a path, he didn't have to guess blind. The Stand Tall Fund covered his enrollment at a vocational program in a nearby city: automotive and diesel repair. He spent 2 years in classrooms that smelled like metal and chalk dust, hands learning the language his mind had always been fluent in. On weekends, when he could get away, he came back to Lawson's garage. There was always an engine that needed listening to, a carburetor that needed cleaning, a kid hanging around with more worries than words to explain them. Maddie grew, too. She outgrew the too big denim jacket and traded it for one that fit. The backpack with the patch retired to a hook in her room, frayed strap and all. She kept drawing. Bikes, rivers, faces in crowds, lines getting surer each year. Sometimes, on slow afternoons, she and Caleb would sit on the garage's front steps, watching the river traffic and the occasional bike roll by. "You remember that morning?" she asked him once. "Which one?" he said, though he knew. "The bus stop," she said. "You stepping in?" He nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I remember." "You scared?" she asked. He thought about it. "More than I've ever been," he said. "But something about not doing anything felt worse, you know?" She did know. She'd been the one standing there with her hands clenched, hoping for a miracle and getting a skinny boy instead. On the far side of town, Brett Langley's life didn't end with that Saturday either. There were meetings. A longer suspension than anyone in his circle had ever imagined. A police report. Community service hours that weren't just a formality, time spent at the youth center, working with kids who didn't automatically look up to him. For a while, he went through the motions, sullen and resentful. Then, slowly, something shifted. It's hard to spend month after month with younger kids and not notice the way they watch you, the way your smallest choices become their patterns. He never became a saint. He carried the memory of that day under the bleachers with him like a stone in his pocket. But years later, when a boy in his care tried to drag another by the backpack, Brett's hand shot out faster than his brain. "Hey," he said, "we don't do that here." People who knew what he'd been saw that moment and filed it away. Change wasn't a headline. It was a series of small, stubborn pivots. Caleb was 20 when Hank handed him a set of keys one afternoon. "What's this?" Caleb asked, wiping grease off his palms before taking them. Hank jerked his chin toward the back bay. "Old frame I've been keeping around," he said. "Figured it's about time it went to someone whose hands itch when he walks past it. You've earned the right to build something that's yours from the ground up." Caleb walked back and found the bike, a bare skeleton of a machine, stripped down to metal and possibility. He ran his fingers along the frame, feeling the cool steel. "You sure?" he asked. Hank nodded. "Every man deserves one thing that's his," he said. "Something he built, not something the world handed him. Besides, I'm getting old. I need somebody around here who can hear the difference between a bad bearing and a bad excuse." They built it slowly, piece by piece, weekend by weekend. Caleb chose each part with the careful eye of someone who had spent years sorting screws and springs in cardboard boxes. He knew what he wanted the machine to say when it finally rolled down Maple Street. The day they fired it up for the first time, the sound filled the garage, low, steady, a promise more than a threat. Maddie leaned in the doorway, arms folded, grinning. "Looks good on you," she said. Caleb swung a leg over the bike, feet flat on the concrete. "Feels like something found its place," he said. Years after that first gray Saturday, Riverton still had fights to pick, budgets to argue over, kids who slipped through cracks. But on buses and in hallways, in locker rooms and behind bleachers, there were also quiet moments when someone thought of a skinny 10-year-old with taped ribs and a room full of riders standing behind him. Every time a kid decided to say, "Leave them alone," instead of looking at their shoes, a thin line connected back to Maple and 3rd. You might be listening to this with your feet up in a recliner, or with a cup of coffee cooling on the table beside you, or with the glow of a TV filling a quiet room. Maybe you remember a moment when you wished someone had stood between you and a bad day. Maybe you remember the time you did that for somebody else. Courage doesn't usually look like movies tell us it does. Most days it looks like a small person with shaking hands and a pounding heart, stepping into a space nobody invited them into and saying, "That's not yours, stop." When that happens, the question isn't just what the bully learns, it's what the rest of us teach by what we do next. In Riverton, for once, the lesson didn't end under the bleachers. It rolled out on 2 wheels, filled an auditorium with leather and steady eyes, turned into cameras and counselors and a fund with a quiet name. Caleb Turner will probably tell you he's just a mechanic, a man who got lucky to meet the right people at the right time. Hank will tell you he just called a few friends. Maddie will shrug and hide a smile behind her sketchbook. But every time that patched backpack gets taken down from its hook, every time a kid sees that winged skull stitched on and remembers the story behind it, the world tilts. Just a hair toward better. If this story found something in you, some old anger, some quiet hope, some memory of a time you stood up or wished you had, don't let it just sit there. Check on the kids in your life. Ask what's happening on their buses, in their hallways, on their practice fields. Be the one adult who doesn't look away when the small voices shake. And if you want to ride with us a little longer, Hear more stories about people the world tried to forget until someone on 2 wheels showed up for them. Stick around. Share this story with somebody who needs it. Leave a comment, tell us your own, and hit that subscribe so you don't miss the next time a little courage turns into a whole lot of engines. Because out there, somewhere, another kid is standing at another bus stop, wondering if anyone will have their back when they take that first step. When they do, you'll know which side you're on.